Okay.
Let me just
So good morning. Yes, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the 18th plenary session of the Vocabulary Semantic Services Interest Group. It's a pleasure to see all of you here. Our session is titled Moving Towards VSSIG 2. And today's agenda is split in three parts. Part one is introducing the group and its updated vision and mission, which you can edit and comment at the end of the collaborative notes that I will share on the chat in a bit. You will then learn all about the updates of our working group and task groups that are part of the VSSIG. Part two shares technological insights. And finally, in part three, we need your help and engagement to help tailor the VSSIG group to your needs and to the current needs. So the last part will be interactive. So we thank you in advance for your presence and engagement. I'll give the floor to Jan. I forgot to say that if you press on the next slide, please, Jan, yes. There will be some time for questions after its presentation. So we encourage you to post questions on the Q&A tab. In order to avoid confusion, please use your the first name of the person you want to talk to, like @name, and then put there your question. I can now give the floor to Jan.
Thanks, Alexandra. And welcome everybody to that session on VSSIG. Thank you for attending and your interest. I'm going to talk about, if my computer decides to move forward with the slides, I will just provide a general introduction to the group, the mission of the group, the vision, and the organization. So I'm myself, Yann Lefranc. I am co-chair with John Greville since 2017. Ouch, that's already 4 years. But it's always a pleasure working with you, John, and Alexandra, who joined us a little bit later in 2020. So basically the group was created in 2015. So it's a while back already, it's 6 years. Now, as I mentioned, we are 3 co-chairs, John, Alexandra, and myself. We have been trying to keep up activities in the group, at least presenting or getting sessions and visibility to the ongoing work in the group during each of the plenary, since plenary 14. And so basically that's our 5th session in a row. So we try to keep on going with continuous activities. The way we work together in the VSSIG is of 2 types. There is the classical type of the working group, where basically it's a formal process within RDA where we decide on the topic of interest and we agree to commit to 18 months mandate to solve the issue and come up with recommendation. And this is quite a formal process because it requires validation. And that has been done and will be presented by Gwen and Barbara for the Idob working group, although they will present mostly their outcome and not the burden of creating a group. But as it's quite complicated and it's quite a commitment to actually have a formal working group in RDA, the way we decided to actually help with more, I would say, informal activity is to create informal focus description groups that we call task groups. And basically, it's really easy to set up. You just fill in a Google spreadsheet where you explain the topic you would like to discuss in that group. You need to have at least 1 chair who's going to generate some activity and maintain the activity of the group. And of course, some participants. You can still create a group on your own, but discussing with oneself is not necessarily very useful. And then the idea is that we are contacting the different task group leaders so that actually they can present the outcomes of their discussion during the RDA plenaries and share with the community at large. So in terms of current activity, well, we have now 3 running task groups, one on minimum metadata led by Clément Jonquet and Luis Bonino, one on fair semantics for repositories led by Alexandra and Jara Kuhn, and one on terms and concept recommendation led by John. And we have one working group that finished actually his first set of recommendations, the group Idob, that's going to be presented after my presentation. And there is the question mark, should we create another working group on fair semantics that we can discuss later on after all the presentation. Now, the group is already 6 years old and the charter hasn't been updated since then. So we realized that few things have changed in the discussions. We, for instance, integrated a lot of discussion around fair semantics, how to make ontologies fair, how to make sure that repository can publish fair ontologies, and so on and so forth. So our idea was to actually start from the initial group charter, where the idea is to develop community-based recommendation on approaches to publish controlled vocabularies on the web. The idea of the interest group is that it should represent all the stakeholders involved in the controlled vocabulary lifecycle in research domain, which is quite the case because we have more than 200 members from with different perspectives. And the idea is to have discussion internally in the group to allow to propose solutions allowing cross-domain use of vocabularies, including mappings relationship between domains. And one of the goals is to help promote good practices that have been developed by the members of the group and even by people outside of the group. We had a few initial objectives, and some of them were achieved over the time, especially through the discussions in the task group on fair semantics repository, where we started looking at aligning the different services that publishes vocabulary online. And now what we would like to do is to actually revisit our charters and our objective to be more in line with the ongoing discussion. Sorry, my computer is stuck. All right. And so John, Alexandra, and myself, we started revisiting our vision and the mission of the group. And the idea of today is to actually discuss, exchange with you on the mission. So the vision we have now for the group is that the group should help harmonize our ways of working, the current practices with semantic web technologies through knowledge and expertise exchange across all domains. The missions is to basically create a network of experts, a network of experts in the realm of semantic web and data. And then based on this network, to share and discuss about new technologies, controversial concepts, new ideas, and existing recommendations. And then from these interactions, whenever it is the need appears, to develop community-based approaches and recommendations to make knowledge organization systems fair. And basically the idea was to integrate the ongoing discussion that we had for the last 2 years on the FAIR principles applying to semantics within the charter of the group. Now, one of the things that we need to actually do in the context of the group is to align with the new RDA group policies. And actually, in the new policies, we need to actually seek new co-chairs and refresh the leadership in the group. They propose approximately every 18 months. So we are now looking for potential members of the group who would be interested in joining us in the leadership team. And the idea is that we'll do a smooth transition between the old co-chair and the new co-chairs. So in conclusion, the idea of this session today is to discuss again the activities, present what's going on already in the group, and then revisit the organization of the RDA interest group and request your help for building a more engaging and active interest group by providing your inputs. That will be in the third part of this session. And I think I'm finished, and I hope I was on time. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate.
We haven't got any questions. It's good that you were on time. We will engage our members and the audience in the end of at part 3 of our session. So I would prefer to go to the next talk from the Idob group. So Gwen will share her screen. Thanks, Jan.
All right. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Hello, everyone. So I'm going to present the outcome of the Research Data Alliance Idob working group. Idob stands for Interoperable Description of Observable Property Terminologies. We have reached the end of life of our working group. It doesn't mean it's going to be the end of our work, but we are ready to present the outcome, and so our motivation is to address the eye of fair data by enabling interoperability between existing terminologies, and also promoting the use of fair terminologies to annotate research data with well-identified, unambiguous, and machine-readable vocabularies. So the group is led by 4 co-chairs. Barbara Magagna, who is going to present this presentation tomorrow morning at the second VSSIG session. Myself, Gwen Moncoffet, from BO8. I should say Barbara is from the Environmental Agency in Austria. Anusurya Devaraju used to be in Pangea, but who is now in Australia. And Maria Stoica, who is in the US. Plus Serko Schindler, as regular members, there was Serko Schindler and Alison Pamment as well. All of us, we formed what we call the core group, but there were many other very valuable contributions from by many others, but they are too numerous here to actually name them. So the output, which is still work in progress, so we are drafting our recommendation report, and this will include and point to the interoperability framework which we have developed. And then we're also going to present a catalog of terminologies, a set of design patterns, a set of alignments, and a set of implementation. All 3 of those will be maintained on GitHub after our working group ends, and a set of recommendations as well. So just a reminder, the focus and scope of our work was what we call the variable. Initially, we called it observable property, but this led to some confusion, so we settled for variable. So some people call it parameters, some people call it observation type, traits, measurement. It is just, it is what is being observed, measured, simulated. It's the concept variable in Idob represents what has been observed independently of where, how, and when the data acquisition took place. So the where, the how, the when, all that can be provided by existing upper ontologies and conceptual models. We will link, and we will connect to those upper ontologies, but we didn't try to solve anything that they had already addressed, basically. We were looking for complementarity. So that includes observation and measurement, SOSA, OBO, schema.org, etc. So the purpose of the interoperability framework is to capture the necessary elements to fully and unambiguously identify a variable in a discipline-neutral way. Our focus, as you will know or you will notice, is environmental sciences in the first instance, and this is because we are mainly coming from the environmental science background. But we believe there is and we already know that there is potential to apply the framework more widely. So what are we trying to solve? Well, we do need, in science, we do need diverse, we do need specialized and precise terminologies, but the disparity hinders interoperability. So we need to connect them systematically in order to avoid proliferation of terminologies that are almost identical but not completely aligned. So this is why we need our interoperability framework, or an interoperability framework. And this interoperability framework will enable us to develop semantic tools and services that will then help us to enable users to label, annotate, identify, discover, align, compare, and harmonize, and aggregate data from different sources. So this was our methodology, our 18 months work plan. We started in 2019, in October 2019. We ran two main tasks in parallel. One was to collect the user stories. The other was to collect conceptual information about conceptual models and terminologies through a survey. We then ran analysis in parallel on those two set of data and information that help us identify functional requirements and also to define the Idob framework, which I will talk about later. Then we tested, there was an iterative process that enabled us to test and check with others the framework. And we are at the phase now of implementation, adoption, as well as developing some design patterns. So this was the progression from user story to user cases to functional requirements. We identified 4 different categories of use cases, which are listed here. I'm sorry, I'm going very fast because there's quite a lot of information to communicate, but you will be able to see the slides. So it's terminology generation and management, resource annotation, data discovery and exploration, and data manipulation and integration. And then from the terminologies we received, we carried out a very detailed analysis of terminologies that had already decomposed variables into atomic elements. And we ended up with quite a complex matrix, which through an iterative process, we simplified more and more. And I must say that we had a series of 3 workshops in March 2020, that I think that enabled, 2021, that enabled us, 21, thanks, Barbara, that enabled us to really simplify, come to that, simplify that framework. And we ended up with just 4 classes to the ontology, the variable, which is the top concept, and the variable is composed of a property, an entity, and it's got a constraint element. And then we've got a series of properties associated with this ontology, which are listed here. So a variable as a property, it can also have entities that take the role of being either a matrix, an object of interest, a context object. And then the variable can also have a constraint that constrains the entity. So all this is explained and detailed in this document, which you've got the link there. It's the Idob framework ontology. It's not yet version 1, so we're still going through, we're still taking comments and feedback. So please have a look and let us know any improvement that you feel we should be making to that ontology. But as you see the diagram there, it is a very simple framework. So we've got adoption stories. We've got 3 main adoption stories that we will be working on as part of the output of this working group. The first one is implementation in ENVTES with extension with Moneris and advanced variable from the long-term ecological research network. And this will address the use case of variable modeling and creation. Then we've got implementation within the NERD vocabulary server, and we will be working on alignments of CF standard names, BODC parameter usage vocabulary, and the Goose essential ocean variables. And this will address the use case of semantic alignment. And then Pangea will also implement the framework for resource annotation of their big environmental database and all their data sets. So there are other implementations that are planned and ongoing, but they're more informal at this stage, and some of them are under discussion. And there are many extensions of conceptual and data model, and they are listed here. Some of them very interestingly, some of them are related to medical data and related to COVID-19 data, which is very interesting to us because it's outside the environmental domain. So the second output of our working group is the Idob catalog of terminology. So we started with a survey. We analyzed what the information we received, and we created a repository. And then the Circo Schindler created this very nice interface on GitHub, which gives access to the terminologies. It's possible to sort the terminologies. It's possible to search them to filter them according to whether they've got properties or entities or constraints terms, as well as method and units. And they're also available in RDF and JSON-LD. So so you can see they are described according to DCAT and Dublin Core terms. And so please go again. There is the link in the presentation. And if some of your terminology is there and there are mistakes or something is missing, then please just use GitHub. There's some YAML files on the repository, so you can submit edits, and we will review that. How am I doing on time?
We have to finish. I was
okay.
about.
Yeah, sorry, because I think I forgot to put my clock on. So this is just a list of our output with the status. So the Idob framework is ready, and we hope to get feedback from people. And the catalog of terminology, same recommendation. It's currently in progress. And in general, you know, we would like to receive feedback from people who were not regular attendant to our meetings. This is what's next. We are seeking to become a task group under VSSIG, and then to carry on collaborating with other working groups and to develop tools and services that use the framework, as well as maintain. We're going to continue maintaining the output of our working group, and those are the essential links. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gwen.
Thank you, Gwen. Brilliant outcomes from the Idob group.
Yeah.
I don't see any questions, but we can quickly go to Jan, because we will end up having some time for discussion at the end of the session today. So I'll give the floor to Jan for presenting.
Thank you, Alexandra. Let me go back and share the screen.
The minimum metadata task group.
Yes, so I'm going to give a really brief overview of what happened recently on behalf also of Clément, who is here. So if you have also questions, you can also ask Clément. So the minimum metadata task group started a while ago. I think it was 2017, and let me just. And the idea was that this group will try to define a minimum metadata for describing semantic artifacts, which means ontologies, control vocabularies, thesauri. So it is a sort of umbrella term to avoid any confusions about ontology. So the lead is Clément Jonquet, and co-lead is Luis Bodino, and the first work was presented during RDA P16. And then we did recently, so the objective of the group, is to define a common model for publishing semantic artifacts based on DCAT, and to define a minimum set of descriptive metadata for fair semantics artifacts using the ontology for describing ontologies developed by Biswana Dutta and Clément Jonquet and its team. And so in terms of recent development, we did a joint workshop between the task group and Ferris Fair, which aimed at defining such a community-driven minimal metadata model and a DCAT profile. So we organized a workshop on June this year. We had 76 participants from 17 different communities. And the idea was to actually present the model, of course, use a simple driving use case, where the idea here is you are an ontology, you are working with your community, you come up with a list of terms, and now you would like to start building up your ontology, but before doing that, you don't want to reinvent the wheel, so you want to look at ontologies that could be of interest to you. So basically, the idea is to have a sort of search engine or to enable searching through ontologies across different repositories. So what we did is actually, during the session, we used Mentimeter, and we asked the participants to vote on the different fields to define whether or not they should be mandatory, recommended, or optional. And we have been analyzing the work, and we are working on the report. So we've been slow on this, but it should come in at the end of the year, either as a format of a report or a publication. We're still finishing the details on this that will describe the model, but also a large part of the time in between has been used to actually try to provide a machine readable description of the DCAT profile that was defined with the voting results. And some of the work we're doing in FAIR now is to use the DCAT profile to create a proof of concept of such a search engine by publishing the content of semantic artifact repositories like BioPortal, AgroPortal into a FAIR data point to enable search across multiple ontology repositories. And I think I'm done with my presentation. Actually, there's one slide missing. I don't know what happened. So if you have any questions, please shoot. Otherwise, I will give the floor to John to present the next task group.
Hello, everyone. I'm feeling a little embarrassed because I think I know what happened to Jan's slide. Sorry, Jan. I meant to copy it. So I'm going to very briefly talk about the recommendations for term and ontology selection. And as you frequent attendees of this meeting know, that's been going on for quite a while, and it makes a little bit of progress each time. And that was true in this case also. We're trying to create an authoritative basic primer for these questions. How do I pick a term, or how do I pick an ontology? Or at least offer more ideas about that with useful references. Next slide. So the activity is entirely contained in one document. The link to that document is there, bit.ly recommending-terms-ontologies. And the goals are to create a reasonably complete set of metrics and indicators of how good a term could be, and figure out how you might include considerations of fitness for a purpose, making it a term that's actually useful for the specific use case at hand. Figure out where you might get data for those metrics, and how the metrics might be adjusted for particular use cases. So it's actually quite a complicated vision, but part of my goal is to provide a resource along the way that people can both access and also contribute to. And so toward that end, I should have included a screenshot sideways or something so you could see what's there, but toward that end, some introductory text has been written that provides context and justification. So there's actually a bit of narrative there, in addition to the more outliney information that was there before, and fleshed out a fair number of details in several sections. So there might be information there that answers quite a few of your questions at this point about good ways to recommend terms and ontologies in your mind or in the real world. And I added a references section because it's starting to be true that people are creating their own references on similar topics, if not exactly the same topic. There's the first reference I added was somewhat self-servingly a list of SCOS resources that I created. There's actually about 4 or 5 pages long, a curated list that is, if you're trying to figure out what this SCOS thing is, what these, how to manage vocabularies, the resources you'll need to do that are in that list. And so it's worth a look. And that's all I have to cover there. I'll go back and rescue John's slides so he can present it later on in the session.
Don't worry, that's
no, it's a really good slide. All right.
Well, apparently you didn't like it.
No, it's formatted just right. It was a great slide. Easy to find. See ya.
Thank you, John.
It'll pop up when you least expect it later on in the session.
Oh yes, surprise slide. Oh, I need to talk.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, John. And of course, I want to encourage you, if you're interested in these particular topics, to get in touch with John and to help him out, adding more to this very interesting topic, right? Which is the one that you hear from all the scientists. It's nice to have an ontology, but which one should I use? And if it doesn't fit, which alternative do I have, and so on. So
yeah, and ties really well with the minimum metadata task group, because if you don't have the minimum metadata exposed, you are not able to actually pick the right term. So they tie really well, yes, the two of them together. The next one is me.
Something has changed.
Are you seeing a different one? It's just after
my slides.
If you go back.
Didn't do that. I didn't do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Here it is.
Here
yeah.
It is.
Yes. So I will talk about the outputs of the FAIR Semantic Repository updates of the FAIR Semantic Repository Task Group, the FSRTG, that we ran together with Gerard Cohen. Next, please. So the task group started in September 2020. And the aim was to evaluate the first set of recommendations for the FAIR semantics that were produced by the FAIR project and their potential for adoption and implementation by semantic repositories. We managed to, with the output that we created, we managed to inform the second version of the recommendations. So that was updated using a lot of our input. We restarted the group again in March 2021. We only managed to have 4 meetings up to now. And we answered questions like, do you find this recommendation relevant for your repository? Do you think it needs to be changed or updated? And do you implement it or plan to implement this recommendation, and how? What was also interesting is the why people joined the group. And some of the whys are because they wanted to harmonize their approaches with what the rest of the world is doing. They wanted to enable best practices at the community level. They wanted to have a way of governing over the implementation of the recommendations and the requirements, so be able to influence these recommendations, to help people within individual communities break the silos and give space for cross-domain dissemination of outputs of other RDA groups, for example, the agri-semantics. We also wanted to have a forum where tools being developed can be proposed, both for enabling best practices, but also for harmonization and enabling FAIR. So that was people's input to why they joined the group. Next, please, Jan. And we had a lot of discussions, brainstorming sessions, and what came out of all of these sessions is semantic artifacts actually a good name to be used for mentioning all vocabularies, ontologies, and thesauri? Are fair principles for semantic artifacts, can fair principles for semantic artifacts be solved by technology? Or do we also need many social agreements as well? The content negotiation by profile and the profiles could provide good validation checks for this, for the fair semantics. Is GUPRI, if you've heard of that, the only way for findability? How can you provide machine readable declaration of sustainability of your repository? Or how can you provide machine readable governance for your vocabularies? And is data and metadata separation good and practical for vocabularies? So these are questions towards the Fair group and to everybody to just think about when we talk about the fair semantics. And I will directly give the floor to Jan because there is an interest in creating a working group on fair semantic recommendations. So I'll let you continue with that, Jan.
Thank you, Alexandra. Yes, so, and thank you for all the people who contributed actually with their feedback. So I'm actually one of the guilty people for semantic artifact term, but it's clearly explained in the intro of the Fair Semantics document why we chose that term. It's because we realized that when we talk about ontologies, people from control vocabulary side or building thesauri felt less leftover. They were just considering it all. And I mean, we had a lot of misunderstanding that was resolved actually with semantic artifact. I agree, it's not a perfect term, but these are things that we can improve over time. And that's the idea of the work of the slides that I'm presenting now and the suggestion I'm making for this group. The idea of continuing the work on fair semantics, finding maybe a new term that would suit better and continue along the lines of a more practical implementation of the fair recommendation. So briefly, I'm going to give the rationale for this fair semantics recommendation that we created in the context of the Fair is Fair project. The semantic landscape is quite heterogeneous, right? There are different levels of semantics from weak to strong, going from code list to high level to formal logic ontologies. There are different formats that are used. There are different names that are used for the similar artifacts, ontologies, control vocabularies, and so on. There are different communities, best practices, and there are different ways of sharing and publishing, which actually, which makes it hard to find and reuse ontologies within and across domain, and lead to a lot of interoperability problems. So basically, the current landscape of semantic artifact is clearly not fair. And so that's a problem because if you want to implement the FAIR principles for data, you need to comply to the FAIR principle I2, which actually requires that the metadata and the data should use vocabularies that follows themselves the FAIR principles. So what we did, and we started to work on this in 2019, was to start looking at various community recommendations that exist out there and start thinking about recommendations that could help ontologists, developer, and the community of semantic web to actually develop fair semantic artifacts. So, and this work was done in tight collaboration with the RDA VSSIG. And now we are at the second version of these community-driven recommendations that you can find here published on Zenodo. Basically, the recommendations, that we have 17 generic recommendations and 14 best practices. The 17 generic recommendations are directly aligned with the FAIR principles, with the individual FAIR principles, where the best practices are more related to the global idea of being more findable or more accessible or more interoperable. Now, with the help of the communities, we organized several workshops to discuss this recommendation. We requested feedbacks from the communities, from the different task groups, and we organized a workshop where we asked the inputs from the communities on the recommendation, if they were clear or not, and to actually vote on whether they should be mandatory, recommended, or optional. And so we ended up having our recommendations aligned with the RFC 2119. So we have 9 recommendations that are a must, mandatory, 7 that are recommended, and 1 that is optional, and 1 that is undetermined. Now, the project is going toward the end. The idea is that we are going to release a 3rd version of this recommendation, collecting the feedbacks on the 2nd version from the different communities and experts who contributed. And the idea for this new version is that on top of the recommendations, we also would like to start looking into practical implementation. And the idea would be to start defining a prototype service architecture and requirements for the different elements of that architecture that would support fair semantics. We are also finalizing or looking in more details on the best practices and the different best practices we identified, and to try to come up with a common core and look at the specific community-specific best practices. And we, of course, will update the recommendations with any feedback we may get from the community. Actually, these recommendations are open for comment to anyone. It's hosted on GitHub. The link is on the slide. We have some convention for understanding the kind of comments you're making, so that help us to actually deal with the integration. Now, this has been 3 years of work almost. Time flies, and we would like to go beyond, because throughout the discussions with the different communities, we realized that these recommendations are actually quite useful, I think, but now we need to make them more practical. Like, okay, it's nice to have such a recommendation, but in practice, how do I implement a GUPRI system that will help me? So GUPRI stands for Globally Unique, Persistent, and Resolvable Identifier. So which system should I use? How should I configure it? What would be the problems with one versus the other? And start diving into the recommendations on the more practical end. So Ferris Fair ends March 2022. We would like to continue this work within the RDE group, which has been quite helpful already, with a working group. And the idea is to use the recommendation as initial basis for the discussion within the group, and also to look into other recommendations that came up recently from different initiatives, and try to actually converge all these recommendations together, so that we come up only with one set of recommendations for everybody that would avoid any confusion and any conflicts, which will kill the point of the work, basically, because there will be then again another interoperability silo because of the non-alignment of these recommendations. So the idea now, and the thing that the way we would like to move forward is, today we're going to ask you simply if you would be interested in joining this group and what would be the topic of interest. We will actually send also this consultation by email on the mailing list of the group, and everybody is welcome. We need to actually define and scope the group, write down the charter and define the plan for this group, knowing that once it starts, we have 18 months to deliver a new set of recommendations to the community. And I think that's it for me. So if you have any questions, please do not hesitate.
Yeah, Jan, sorry, here's
Yes.
Barbara. I wanted to ask you if you are, you know, about the paper that Simon Cox and I, and yeah, you know that. So it's a bit about how to actually create fair vocabularies. Is this also something that could be considered or discussed in this group as an input?
Yes, that's part of the other recommendations that I was mentioning. I didn't mention them explicitly. There's this paper on fair vocabulary, and there's also some work from Maria Poveda and the team of the University of Madrid. So the idea is, instead of having too many different recommendations, is to start working together toward aligning. I know that in the paper you have done that already at the end of the paper, trying to look at how they converge and what's different. I think there are some complementarity on which we can definitively work. That's the point of the working group, right? So the working group is an open structure where we should discuss this so that there is only one set of recommendations and not 2 or 3 or 4.
Totally fine. It's just a matter of time, you know. I cannot sit in each of the working groups, but yeah, anyhow, it's interesting to converge here. Yeah, don't know if I can commit to yet another working group. Yeah.
Of course, I understand. So the idea is to kickstart the discussions, to invite everybody who would be interested to actually discuss about the charter, the group organization, who can commit, who can't, because we are all also extremely busy, so it's hard to commit on another group, and see how we can move forward. And so, of course, then we will get in touch with Simon and the other people involved. So they might have more time than you, Barbara. But of course, the idea is it's a working group. So then there will be discussion in the VSSIG. So it's all open and transparent.
Yeah. I think Francoise had a question before.
Yes, it disappeared because I am not sure about it. But do you think that there is an interest in having a working group common with other organizations, or it's something which is in RDA and gathers the people who are interested?
So that's an excellent question. I think RDA is the best platform for that, but we should involve other organizations. I know that CoData is working on something similar. So I think the more people working on the same area and willing to achieve the same goals, the better.
Yes, because it's quite possible there is a number of groups in the RDA which are common with other organizations. So it's just a suggestion it's not so difficult to create such a group if everybody is of goodwill.
Exactly. So that's what we need to discuss. Is who's willing and who's has goodwill. Thank you, Francois, for that question.
Okay, excellent. Shall we move, because we are going really well on time. So shall we move to the next one? I think it's Nicolas Carr that opens the first part of, here he is. It's a brutal time. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, isn't it, Nick?
Yeah, 10 to 3, that's right.
Thanks for joining. It's pretty brutal, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Is he young?
I'm 40.
Okay, I'll count it.
Okay, so thanks very much for having me. Alexandra, are you going to run, do you want to run the slides?
The clicker is Jan. Jan, could you please click?
Okay, Jan's the clicker, all right. Okay, thanks, Jan. So this is a 2-part presentation. Just pause there for a second, Jan. So myself and Alexandra, and we're going to be presenting on really content negotiation by profile as a standard and protocol, and its use in mostly in vocabularies, but also a couple of other examples of use. So here's the little schedule. I'll introduce ConEgP, a bit of content negotiation background, over to Alexandra for the main bit, about NVS's use of it, and then a sort of a final extra scenario. So next slide, please. So just a brief background on content negotiation. I mean, most of us who are working with internet technologies at this technical level will be quite across it, but for people who are not, and just for a reminder, it's really the HTTP mechanisms to allow you to get different representations of a resource. So you can say in that little bit of code down the bottom, get me a resource, a web address, and you can set certain parameters to get variations on that resource if that's supported by the server. So rather than getting HTML, you might get IDF or XML or some other kind of format information. You may or may not compress the information. So you can say, as a requester, a client, I accept this resource view compressed or not. And there's quite a few different options as to what you might request. You can even request a particular time version of a resource. But the content negotiation is just the general term for negotiating which form of content you want. Also, another prominent one is language. You know, this resource might be available in English or German or something, and I can request a language. So that's the background to content negotiation. Next slide, please. So content negotiation by profile. So this is a small technical extension to content negotiation, and it's one of many technical extensions. So there are extensions to allow for, well, negotiation by the time of the resource sort of version, and many other things. This particular extension is, as it says there, how internet clients may negotiate for content provided by servers based on data profiles to which the content conforms. So this is all defined in the W3C specification called ConAP. The link to it's there. It also accompanies an IETF internet draft, which describes this in IETF speak. But basically you can say, get me this resource, and if possible, get me the content of this resource according to some profile. And you can identify that profile with the URI. I'll describe what profiles are in a second. This comes strictly before the formats and other things. So before you just decide whether you want this in RDF or XML or JSON or whatever else, you want to know that the resource contains information according to some specification. Also, this allows for certain forms of resource discovery, which I'll describe in a second, and it also goes beyond HTTP into other protocols. There are many, many APIs out there that allow for resource returns based on the conformance of that resource to a data profile. This content negotiation by profile really tries to harmonize many of those approaches. So we can do the same mechanics in HTTP. We can use query string arguments and potentially other kinds of APIs. It's a very simple concept, but a very profound change to the internet. Actually, when you think about it, it's the only content negotiation which expressly says, I want information according to an information model. All the other ones are formats. This is an information model thing. And it has analogs within other parts of internet negotiation, because you can always ask for things like, I want JSON, and then in the content negotiation for the format JSON, you can specify a profile within JSON, but this is not within a particular format, it's across all formats. So we could have information according to a profile that has many formats. Next slide, please. So what is a profile? So here's the definition, and this is out of the profiles vocabulary, which is linked to from the content negotiation by profile specification. But basically, a profile is a specification that constrains, extends, or combines, or provides guidance or explanation about the usage of other specifications. So really, it's a mini standard, and the standard might derive from other ones. The example I've got down there in the bottom left is the VocPub profile, which is a profile of SCOS that I and others use. And it just constrains SCOS. It says that, you know, you've got to have one concept scheme per file, and you've got to have these certain properties for concept schemes and for concepts. Very, very simple profile. And the profile itself is a defined thing online, and it has multiple resources. It has description documents to help you use the profile, and it has alignment with schema.org. It's got examples and it's got validators. So that's what we mean by profile. And it's things like vocpub and SCOS itself and OWL, that you can say, get me content according to ... Now, it's not very useful saying get me content according to OWL because it could be anything. So typically the profiles that we want to get content according to are an information model that's constrained. So Idob would be one. Get me information according to Idob. That's the background. Over to you, Alexandra. Next slide. Thanks, Jan.
Thank you. So thanks, Nick. I will present a use case of content negotiation by profile implemented in the NERC vocabulary server. Next, please. So that's the NERC vocabulary server and the vocabularies that we serve. In the next slide. So what drove us to do content negotiation by profile is that all of our NVS vocabularies are expressed in SCOS and they are operational. So other people are using them heavily in their everyday processes. They are part of tools. So we are not allowed to change what we already have. But we also wanted to express mappings and relationships using more expressive ontologies rather than SCOS, other than SCOS. So for example, we wanted to express the following triples, that EOV oxygen using the PUV ontology has chemical object oxygen, that EOV oxygen has property concentration, and that EOV oxygen has matrix the water body. And we wanted people to be able to consume only these properties without consuming the SCOS mappings. Next, please. So this is how we managed to do it. Up here, you can see on the curl accept how a simple content negotiation URL looks like. So it already asks, says that I accept only RDF XML and give me that URL in RDF XML, please. To know that you have a content negotiation by profile for the NVS, you will have, Jan, can you please click? And there are things that will pop up on the slide. So in order to know, yeah, so you will see the property conforms to, and then the profile that this vocabulary conforms to. For example, for us, it's the PUV. And then you will see on where the arrow points, additional profiles of that you can access. And now, in order to access in a machine readable way and using the content negotiation by profile, a different profile of a certain vocabulary, you will use the curl, you will use the accept header for the format and the accept profile to ask for a certain profile of the same URL. So the URL, you get it once, but you can have different profiles and different formats. Next, please. So when you click in a profile, you can see that each profile has a token, which is the name that you can call that profile. It has a description. It has the different formats you can call it with. And it has a URL that you can go and check the profile. And you put the token on the profile query string, and you put the format on the media type query string. Next, please. And one more. Yeah, until the animation finishes. Yeah, thank you. And I think click, Jan, please, on these ones. So up here, you can see how you can call NVS using its default profile, which is NVS. And in the Connect P, you can see how you can call NVS a certain vocabulary, but using a different profile and requiring any type of serialization or format that you want. One more, please. Yes. And here you can see an HTML view of a concept that is not now expressed only in SCOS, but you can see its metadata here and the mappings that we have used from the PUV. And you can access it in a machine readable way or in an HTML human readable way. Next, please. What that gave us is that we write our concepts and vocabularies once, but we publish in many different profiles to satisfy the needs of different communities by using the different profiles. Our API payload becomes lighter because we separate our payload per profile, and people stop getting annoyed by getting everything, all the metadata of a certain vocabulary, but they only get what exactly they want. And I think that was my last slide, and I'll give it back to Nick.
Thanks, Alexandra. Now, there should be one slide back one. Jan? I think we're missing one slide in there. Oh dear, where's it gone? There it is. Okay. Yeah, there it is. Okay, so just to recap, just 2 points that Alexandra made. So one is that you can get content negotiation by profile results in more than one way. You can use HTTP commands and you can use query string arguments. There is a potential to do it other ways too. The specification says this is the abstract way of working, and then here is the query string argument and the HTTP specific ways of doing it, but you could define other ways too. And that's because there might be special APIs out there like Web Feature Service or all kinds of things which essentially operate as content negotiation by profile, and you might want to ensure that thing does, and you can actually define that way of working as a content negotiation by profile way of working. There's only a few operations you have to implement. That's one thing. Now, one of the benefits from one of the things we realized when doing the work here was that some APIs that are RESTful APIs are actually just conceptual subsets of content negotiation by profile. And one of them is the OGC Features API. So the OGC Features API is a replacement for Web Feature Services and so on. It uses JSON instead of XML. It's RESTful instead of query string argument, but it's very similar to Web Feature Services. But all the operations that you need to do with an OGC API are all able to be expressed as content negotiation by profile or linked data API functions. So we've created many now, I would say 10, 15 plus different OGC APIs that are in fact linked data APIs using content negotiation by profile. And on the right there, you see Geoscience Australia's Floods API. I should have put a link to it. I will do that. But the API there returns spatial information about flood areas from satellites, and it uses a linked data API, content negotiation by profile, to fulfill all the requirements of an OGC API, as well as providing many other options as well. So OGC API requires GeoJSON and HTML. It does that. You're seeing the HTML, but you can also get the content in RDF as well and other things. Last slide, please, Jan. So this is the alternate profiles page. Pretty much all instances of content negotiation by profile system have pages like this that tell you what other formats and models are available. They have to. It's part of the content negotiation by profile that you actually tell the user this. And what you're seeing here is for one of these flood items, these are the different formats you can get. There's the Open API or OGC API model. There's the GeoSparkle model, and those are the formats. We were looking on the previous page at the HTML version of one of these, but you can get the content in GeoJSON, XML, etc. And different APIs, different instances of this API will require special models. So we've got a generic Open API or OGC API. We might have generic GeoSparkle. Oh, but this is a special spatial collection about chicken sheds. Here's a chicken shed API model that deals with all the things you need to know about chicken sheds. And the API can very easily be expanded to include a chicken shed profile and information according to that profile, and you can request for it in conventional ways in query string arguments or HTTP.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Nick.
Done.
Do we have more? Because, yeah, thank you. Because we have to move to the next one so that we manage to have the discussion. Thank you very much.
Something?
Yes.
So the connection to Idob would be to have Idob profile in NBS, right?
Yeah, instead of like expressing through PUV, you would see the same properties, IOP property or IOP object of interest, and then people can consume the Idob profile only.
Perfect, thank you.
The same we were for the GCAT profile we're building for the semantic artifacts, right? So it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you for that presentation.
Alexandra's system has DCAT profile, not your DCAT profile, a profile of DCAT's version of the resources at the whole data set level.
Great, so thank you very much. Let's move to the next speaker, who is, here we have an extra slide with useful links. So the next speaker is Dan Broder, who's going to talk about semantic mappings and the SEMAP perspective. Dan, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jan. I don't see my own image, by the way. Not that I'm vain, but still.
I see you.
Okay, good, good. I keep seeing you then. That's a good way. Okay, thank you, Jan. It's not the first time I was asked to present SEMAP for this interest group. About a year ago, I also presented what was then still a young project in the beginning. And I'm glad to have the opportunity to show what happened and where we stand now. Next slide, please. Yeah, so SEMAP is an EOS co-creation project supported by the EOS Secretariat. In fact, it was the duration about a year, so ended in March this year. The initiative came from a group loosely known as the Group of European Data Experts, and Clarin Eric, my own affiliation, was asked to coordinate it. The goal was to study and propose a framework that supports pragmatic semantic mappings. Not implementing such a framework, but doing a study and proposing an implementation plan. It's targeted at specific interoperability goals, emphatically so. So it's not about solving the world problems at world level, but rather at solving interoperability problems at the project or individual research project level. All mappings should be shared and published in open registries and made fair. This will not surprise you. Grounded in current practices and building on existing resources. So where there are resources, we should not reinvent them. And especially reusability plays a huge role, making it easy for researchers to share their mappings and create new mappings on the basis of existing ones. Next slide, please. So what kind of mappings are we talking about? Semantic mappings? Well, they can be mapping between entities of different description systems, so ontologies or vocabularies, but often also simply elements in descriptive schemas. And what surprised me, at least, a lot was that in many disciplines, this can all take place by specifying it in pure tables, while what I'm used to in my own discipline of the humanities, things are often much more complex, where you also require logic. So lots of if-then before you can come to a valid mapping. Next slide, please. So we had a project plan, of course. We started with a task force of around 8 experts discussing fundamentals, reading the relevant reports. Some of the reports were already mentioned today. and also preparing interviews with community experts. We managed to get around 25 interviews with community experts from various disciplines, inventorizing existing practices and tools and resources, and gathering requirements from their perspective about what the semantic mapping infrastructure should be as part of EOSC. And it was quite interesting, these interviews. We found very interesting tools, for instance, not only from the usual suspects, such as biomed, but also in the humanities, where we found a specifically interesting one, a vocabulary matching tool that can be used to match between vocabularies. And yeah, finally, of course, the interview analysis and synthesis in an implementation plan took place. Next slide, please. So what are the essential takeaways? Well, from the community side, community views and the requirements, they thought that if we would just succeed in registering mappings with proper metadata and also tracking provenance, that would already be quite useful. They thought that registry should be inclusive and also support registering externally hosted mappings. The added value of the SEMAF registry would then be, let's say, improved sharing and discovery, better provenance tracking, a uniform accessibility management, and perhaps integration with some smart mapping creation tools. For instance, that visual tool to support the easy vocabulary matching. And it was also suggested to us that maybe we should not work towards one single SEMAF registry, but rather a federation model where several SEMAF registries, maybe maintained by individual communities, would work together in a federative model. Next slide, please, Jan. And what was the view of the experts and the semantic as well as infrastructure experts? Well, semantic mapping should be fair and first-class citizens, will not surprise me, just as other semantic artifacts. This had some implications for their independent existence, something that you do not see yet even in advanced ontology mapping tools, where the mappings are often very much dependent of the ontologies themselves. So this has consequences for identification of mappings. And we found out that some practicalities with respect to granularity still has to be worked out. For instance, do you support independent existence of single mappings between single concepts, or do you think that should happen, identification should happen at the level of bundles, for instance, crosswalks? And yeah, although the experts also saw that SEMAP should accept mapping in the forms of tables or in any way forms of formats that are used by communities, we should still provide motivation for using higher level machine actionable formats such as RDF and JSON LD. And although it was not mentioned in the report, let's follow-up discussions has also led us to consider this new format SSSOM. Next slide, please, John. So what's the status now? As I already said, the project was finished in March, so the report was submitted March 31. It's available from that link you see over there. The report was discussed in some follow-up events. It has been let's say, recently even be used in a discussion on fair digital object typings. We have a new publication, including some community use cases in preparation. And I hope that really will happen this year. And we have from the SHOC, the SSH thematic cluster project, we have a semantic mapping workshop in preparation. But of course, the intention has always been to have a SEMAF implementation project. And in that respect, there is some, let's say, some hope. So, next slide, please, Jan. So discussion within different consortia or proto-consortia, I should say, of future EOX projects tells us that we have excellent chances, at least for a partial implementation of SEMAF. And we saw that although semantic mappings are considered important, it is not feasible to have a separate project on furthering only a dedicated mapping infrastructure. So semantic mapping infrastructure will be more favorably regarded if it's presented in relation with the pragmatic goal, for instance, metadata interoperability. Well, this should not prevent us treating semantic mappings as fair objects, so with an independent existence in their own right. And I think we can arrange that. And furthermore, there are also some existing projects and some support and preparative actions from SEMAF is currently being considered. And that's as much as I can say about that, since these projects have not been approved yet. And that was my last slide, I think.
Yes, it was. Yes, it is. Thank you, Dan. Is there any question for Dan?
Yes, I asked if I could have the DOI of the SEMAF report in the chat.
It is in the presentation, Barbara.
Yeah, then the link to the presentation, please.
No, it's a link.
I'll put that.
It's.
I'll put the slide deck.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
May I ask a
I
question?
do it. Here is the slide deck. Yeah,
you guys
go ahead.
Yeah, Clément speaking. Just
yes,
wanted to, maybe Jan, you could have told me that, but I'm just thinking about asking the question now. But indeed, we have some vision about SEMAF compliant, including for ontology repositories that will include the mapping repositories. And what is the status of the SEMAF working group as of now? I mean, in the meantime, while we are waiting for some potential project implementation or project submission on SEMAF.
Yeah, quite a few.
How this group is working? Are you guys exchanging emails, still discussing, or just waiting for an opportunity? Or
both?
Yeah.
In the sense that quite a few of us are involved in the project preparation or have been involved in preparing some of these projects I pointed to. And well, there are loose discussions going on about what I said, the other paper, which should really be published one of these months. And yeah, in discussion that I had with Jan, he kindly offered, let's say, a home for SEMAF within this interest group as a task force, which would be an option, of course, because also if all these projects are being approved, we still would need a platform to discuss with a wider range of communities. This is very important to keep doing that. And I don't know how it is in the, let's say, the 0105 call project, but in the 01031, there is also ample, say, resources to reach out to communities. So to do an extra requirements analysis, looking at communities. And what I said, so also in existing EOSC projects, there is talk about a working group looking into metadata, but part of the metadata would also be the metadata interoperability question, so mappings. So there are a number of activities, and it would be nice to align them, of course, not too much, because there still needs to be some degrees of freedom there. But I think once these projects are accepted and start running, we will have a well, say a higher level motivation to get aligned, and it might take still, what is it, half a year?
Mm-hmm.
So
I don't know how, if you
Yeah.
see that the same, Clément and Jan, of course.
Sorry, I didn't hear your question.
Well, if you have the same attitude that while these other potential projects have not started, there is of course all opportunity for us to discuss as a kind of preparative, but there is also lots of freedom still to go on. But we should, I think, prevent that there is let's say, initiative that would, let's say, make things more complex than they should be.
I think so. That's we are part of the discussion, right, Alexandra? So
Yes.
I think we're running out of time for our initial plan, like usual. So
shall we start it?
Back,
shall we start the discussion?
We could start the discussion. Just one thing that I would like to say. So RDA VSSIG is supposed to be a sort of platform for discussing this kind of issues, right? So that's why we created this idea of a task group. We don't need to go for a charter. You don't need to go through a whole administrative process to kickstart discussions between experts. Now, if these discussions then become very important and there is more work, then we can convert them into a working group. Now, one of the key things, so SEMAF could be indeed a task group in the VSSIG. Alexandra maybe can tell also about another resource that we propose to host. And the idea, and the good thing with RDA is international, right? So far the discussions happened in communities, but mostly in Europe. So the idea is to extend these discussions to the other part of the world to avoid having duplication of effort, and we start doing things in Europe differently than in US or Australia. So that's why also the RDA VSSIG is really a great platform for it. And so that's what we're trying to do in the, let's say in the VSSIG 2.0, is to connect with existing initiatives, help them getting a public front end, maybe collect and get some inputs. So maybe Alexandra, you can talk about the other resource that we are currently considering as adding hosting in the VSSIG.
Yeah, so during the CDataCon conference that took place a few weeks ago, there was a discussion about a list of vocabulary tools that has been created. Nicholas Carr was part of the creators, and the group was the workshop was called DAGSTOOL Workshop, and the participants were interested in putting together a catalog of vocabulary tools to address questions like, if you want to do something with vocabularies, and there are a lot of tools to choose from, how do you decide which one to use? So they created a list of these tools to create vocabularies with, but they want a home, they want a host, but they also were thinking this catalog needs to be governed. So we were thinking of having a task group that could meet to update that. I'm just raising it here. I don't think we have the time to move more than that, but then during our regular sessions that Jan will talk about, we can tackle all of these issues that come up. So shall I give the floor to Jan? And he has posted a link to a survey, short survey about what we are going to do with the VSSIG group. If you are happy to do that with us live now so that we can see the stats and we can get a feel of how you feel about the group and where do you want the group to go, please help us fill the form together. Jan will drive it and you can please give your feedback. It's the only way to know about you.
Yeah, so the idea of that forum is to start collecting your views on how we should move forward with the interest group. So far, we have been active during the RDA plenary, but there are so many topics of discussions during the plenary, the time is too short, so we do not end up having the time to discuss. So one of the ideas that we would like to push forward is to actually discuss during regular meetings, but we would like to check with the people that are part of the group, the frequency. So we are asking you a lot of very simple questions in the form that I'm presenting now. And let me, because I'm
the link is on the chat.
The link is on the chat. Sorry. And so what we ask first is to actually collect some information about you, so that if we have some questions or specific questions based on your answers, then we can get back to you. And the idea also is to understand, what is your role, for instance, in semantics? Are you an ontologist? Are you an ontology repository owner for like a vocabulary service owner, like Alexandra, or an ontology repository owner? So that we can understand also the landscape of the members and their different work. So to fill in the form, well, it's rather simple. First, provide email. My full name, my affiliation, and then I'm an ontologist. And then next, you will see some questions regarding the new vision and the mission. We, yes, I can share the form again, sorry. Here it is. So we would like to get your view on what you think about the new vision and the new mission of the interest group. So you will see the vision here, and then we just ask, would you adhere to such vision or not? Or the idea is great, but we should maybe rephrase. And if you have some comments, the vision and the missions are in the collaborative note at the end of the document, so you can go and edit. Please use suggestion mode so we can keep track on the edits. And then, so of course, I adhere to the vision, then the mission, then provide us your inputs. Do you love it, like it, dislike it? Are you neutral? You hate it? You think it should be clarified? It should be more ambitious, more focused, or even you don't understand the mission as such. And if you have any other thing that you would like to say that's not in the list, please do so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the mission and vision is in the collaborative notes at the end of them. So yeah, please edit.
And then a question, would you be interested in contributing with us to writing the charter? So we'll share every document that we are generating are shared on Google Drive, so they will be accessible through the RDA wiki. But the idea is to see whether or not you would like to actively contribute with us to redefine the charter of the interest group. So of course, yes, for me. Then the next session is more about the ways we are working together. So basically, do you like the format of the session so far during the plenary? How do you think we should improve them? And we are really eager to get any feedback for making them better. Would you be willing to attend actually regular meetings? Would it be possible for you and of interest? If so, what would be the frequency for such meeting? Should we go for a monthly or every other month? I think every 3 months is a bit too, there will not be that many meetings between two plenaries basically. But this is the frequency we're proposing. And if you have other suggestions, please feel free. And then a question about the kind of topics to have an idea of how we could structure these regular meetings. And then whether or not you would see your contribution as a real active contributor or more an observer, which is fine as well. And then if you are interested in contributing, how? So would you like to propose discussion topics? Would you like to lead a task group? Would you like to provide use cases so that we can work on some specific topic together? Contribute to the creation and maintenance of community-driven resources. For instance, the resource Alexandra was referring to, built by Nick. Actually, they will need help to maintain that and keep it up to date, help us organize and animate regular meeting, present new technologies, service, and methodologies like we did today, because I think it's great to have the people that are trying to come up with new ideas that they can share and we can learn about them. Provide support to the co-chair, so if you want to give us a hand, or even now, and that's an important question for us, become a co-chair of the interest group, because as I mentioned in the beginning of the session, the RDA group policy has changed, and they request us to have a change in leadership every 18 months, roughly. So we need to have new, new volunteers for helping us. And then we have a Slack channel, but it's awfully silent. So do you like Slack? Should we continue with Slack, or do you have other platform that you would think is better for discussing within the group? And then I think I cannot, so I like it. Yes, absolutely.
Sorry, Jan.
Before we stop, go ahead.
I wanted to ask, so is semantic artifact under discussion? Really? I thought we agreed on that.
I can't hear you, Barbara.
Is semantic artifact really under discussion as a term?
We lost.
Well, it can be a topic of discussion. Now, if you come up with a better name, please let me know, because believe me, it took us a while to come up with this one.
Do you like it or do you not like it, Barbara?
Barbara says no.
I don't want to discuss it. Okay.
I like it as it is. Sorry, I like it. I don't, but it was somehow, yeah. I've heard that you are discussing it.
It was suggested in somewhere along the line that somebody didn't. It wasn't good for some reason that I never heard.
It came up in the FAIR semantic group discussions. That
it came up in several workshops that actually some people do not like semantic artifacts.
Yeah.
So yes, it could be a subject of discussions during the working group.
Guys, watch out! We said we're not going to discuss about it, and then we are discussing it
because it's the end of the meeting, and we're all punchy. Hey, hurry up and get to the conclusions. Would you there filling out form, Guy, so we can see them?
Has anybody filled the form? I can only see John's and mine.
Yep, so far it's a little thin. Jan's making his perfect, which we encourage everyone to do after the meeting, of course.
Yeah. And then the last set of questions, it's about the working group on FAIR semantics. Would you like to contribute directly on which topic? And you can select many. And then would you be interested in joining the team to actually write the charter and the plan for the group? And then send. And now we can see actually, well, there are 4 answers. Thank you, Frances. Okay, so all the data for this survey is actually available online, open. It's in the RDA VSSIG Google Drive in the plenary session folder. So they're all stored in an Google spreadsheet that's in the folder. So then we'll sorry, I just saw a comment from Françoise. That's a good comment indeed. We may spend 18 months to discuss about is semantic artifact a good name or not.
Yeah, whenever a topic is very controversial, we'll stop talking about it and go to the next, because that's exactly what happens. Shall we finish the session, because we are
I think we should finish.
7 minutes.
Already 7 minutes behind.
Yeah. So shall I leave you to do the concluding comments, Jan?
If you want, or ladies first. If you have some comments that you would like to share.
Okay. It was lovely to have you all here and have a relaxed discussion, sharing knowledge. It would be lovely to have you more if we agree that we have more sessions together. We are also having another session 7:30 UK time in the morning, 8:30 Central European time.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for being here and for your contributions. Thanks to all the presenters. That's it from me. Jan, John.
Feel free to come back tonight. I mean, tomorrow morning, whenever it is for you. Thank you, everybody.
It's going to be tomorrow morning early. So thank you, everybody, for joining this session. And we'll keep in touch. If you are registered on the mailing list of the group, then you will see some email from us soon. And if you want to get another same session, then you can come up tomorrow morning early for the Europeans, or at a decent hour for Nick. Thank you, Nick, for joining in the middle of the night. Really appreciate.
All right.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
that's
Thank
it.
you.
So have a good night, Nick, and have a good evening for the Europeans, and a good day for the Americans, and see you soon.
Yeah, thank
Right.
you, Jan.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.